Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the Community Forum. My name is Andrea Gartner, and I am the chair of the Danbury Democratic Town Committee, also known as the Danbury Democratic Party. Today, I have a guest, Lisa Scailes. She's the executive director of the Cultural Alliance of Western Connecticut. And today, for the next half hour, we're going to talk about a subject that has just been not just affecting us here locally, it's a national issue, and it's grown into an international movement. So we're going to touch a little bit about what's been happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. Lisa, welcome.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi. Before we get into this really important topic, can you please explain to our viewership a little bit about the Cultural Alliance of Western Connecticut and your role? It's a regional organization. I'm familiar with it, but I would like our viewers to also be familiar.
Absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity. So the Cultural Alliance of Western Connecticut, we're a regional arts organization. We're based in Danbury. We serve the greater Danbury area. As far north as Milford, as far south as Ridgefield, and all of the surrounding towns. And our job is to promote, educate, and advocate for the arts, for the benefit of the quality of life and for the economy. And there's a number of services that we provide to the arts community, to the public, within those buckets of promote, educate, and advocate.
Thank you. And you've really been the face forward of the Cultural Alliance for a decade now. And
yeah,
what's so interesting is that initially a lot of the heavy lift with the organization is trying to make the case that arts, culture, supporting the creative economy, people who are part of the creative economy is an important dynamic in the furthering and the healthier of a community and their businesses. I think time has been on the Cultural Alliance's side. There's a lot of information now that sort of connects those two with the growth of hacker spaces, people now working from home, people getting a lot more creative in this pandemic with how to respond to the issues at hand.
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, almost 85, maybe more % of people that work in these companies in the places that we live, they think that they value the arts very, very highly and just, look for places that have really creative environments to live and work. So the arts is definitely a very important part of life for most people. And particularly during a time like now, I mean, it's the arts that people are gravitating towards, want to see in order to, lighten our day and help with our emotional well-being, to be able to make sense of what's going on. So, the arts are highly sought after and needed at a time like this.
And I know recently the organization sent out an appeal looking for donor support. Basically, the organization, the Cultural Alliance, is in a unique position to weather this current pandemic crisis. And it's just so important that we have an organization like the one you're leading intact on the other side when we need to start picking up the pieces and putting things back together. For people who might be interested in supporting the organization and the work you do, can you provide that information of where they can donate and how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, our website is a good place to start, and you can reach us online at www.cawct.org, which is our acronym, Cultural Alliance of Western Connecticut. Or you can certainly contact me directly, and my email is my first initial and last name. So that's Scailes @cawct.org. And I'd be happy to have the conversation with you. We do need help. Thank you for that, Andrea. There's a lot of initiatives that we're in the middle of right now, and we've been doing a lot of triaging at the beginning of this pandemic, and so there's a lot going on.
Right, and for anyone who's part of the creative economy or who's working from home as an artist, the Cultural Alliance does send out a newsletter. It is chock full of information of how to get assistance through the pandemic relief buttons on the portal by the state, how to apply for PPP. You're also offering online courses and webinars, really doing a great job. So I want to say hats off to you and all the effort that you're putting in behind that.
Thank you.
So, so I'm going to disclose to our viewership, Lisa and I are really good friends. We have been friends for well over 10 years. There's nothing that we can't talk about. We lend, as single moms, we lend each other support. Our families know one another. It's really one of the great blessings of my life is our friendship. And so, well, of course, streaming this from home. So that was my little dog. and so when the events started to unfold after George Floyd's very dramatic, murder in the hands of a policeman in Minnesota, you and I have had a lot of conversations around what's happening, race and racism. And I know I saw you at the 3 weeks ago. There was a protest, a peaceful protest in Danbury that was really led by our young people, which I find so encouraging. But I think in the discussions that we've had, and I've learned to remind people in conversations I've had afterwards with people about just how long the Black community has suffered pain of a broken justice system. And I feel it was very valuable personally to get a perspective of someone who grows up with that. And I have to say, even you and I have had conversations around this issue in the last 4 years as some of as people who are very conservative seem to get more outspoken and overtly racist. And I tell people that I'm a first generation American. Both my parents came to this country. My father never became a US citizen. And when I think that people will look at me and somehow think that I might be more American than you are, when you in fact have roots in this community, in the Danbury community, that go back to last century. So I use that as an example to just sort of put people on notice that it isn't the same. There isn't inequality and there isn't injustice. But in our conversations too, you've also been very quick to say, listen, not to make you feel guilty, not to place any blame. It's not to make you feel bad, but we have to start from a point where we're accepting that there is this injustice. So I'm just going to let you speak to that because you do speak to it so eloquently.
Yeah, well, we talk about this often, you and I, Andrea. It's not personal. And I think that is something that is a great place to start, is to understand that it's not, to all of my white colleagues and friends, it's not personal. But it is time to start taking a very close look at systemic bias. And it starts with the person in the mirror. Even with the most open and giving individual, that's what systemic means. It means, really examining oneself and seeing how much it is of society, of community norms, of what you've grown up with that you carry around with you. You and I are friends. I know how you feel about me. I know you as a person, but it's not about Lisa and Andrea, right? It's about how we see the world. If it was some other Black person that you are confronted with, what happens when you go into an elevator or you're walking down the street and you see someone of color, Black or brown, that you don't know? Being in touch with your own feelings when those circumstances happen. And I really do feel like it starts there. And then there's so much more to continue the conversation, right? But listen, I'm not here as the expert on Black Lives Matter. I just happen to be Black. And as you pointed out, I have been subject of discrimination all of my life. We don't walk around talking about it, but that doesn't mean that it's not here. And it doesn't exist, even with the people that you know. So what I'm interested in my role as the Cultural Alliance executive administrator is how can we start to have these conversations within within the industry, and what can we do as an industry leader to continue those conversations and figure out how we can make change, because I think we all have a role in that on one level or another.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of our conversations, we talk about how do you reimagine the systems, because even in the conversation we had recently about the taking down of statues,
Yeah.
Not necessarily agreeing with the prevailing view, because sure, those statues are a slice of history. I mean, maybe there's a way to redefine what that statue means, rather than the glorification of what someone did while they were alive. It can serve as a reminder of how our history hasn't been properly told in this country.
Yeah, that was the perspective, I think, that I certainly share. And you and I were in agreement with that. And it really gets down to a fundamental issue in my mind, and that is, this issue is complicated. It's not something that can get fixed easily. I think we all have to do some really hard work, some soul searching, and to the extent that those of us have the power to do it, to start changing policy, practices, norms in places that we need to change them. Be it, with law enforcement, be it with education or our healthcare system, or affordable housing. I mean, there's our prison systems. I mean, there's enough for us to do before, that we need to really get started with. And taking the issue of taking statues down, not taking them down, I don't know if it's as simple as that. I don't think it is.
And we don't want to oversimplify what this is. And in conversations with people, and this is something, again, I have to thank you for, because we were talking about this so early on, that the first point is it's not personal. And when you see the memes and you see people talking about, oh my gosh, the looters, and grouping them in with the peaceful protesters, it all gets mixed up and very distracting. And a lot of times that is people's tendency to do that. These are tough questions. These are really sensitive issues. Yep. So rather than, it's easy to get distracted, right? It's easy to just throw it all into one thing and say, well, the looters equal the protesters, and they don't. So I think that was like really the major point, was that it's not personal. And I always try to redirect people back to how a lot of these things that are flaring up, whether it's online or on social media, or even in conversations when someone's pulling out a fact or figure that's questionable or slanted or biased, that I have found myself redirecting them to the idea that there is a systemic injustice happening that is rooted in our country's history, and that if you can't agree on that, like if you can't see that it's slanted already, then we don't really have a conversation. But I find people are open to that. They're open to acknowledging that yes, injustice exists, and it's not personal. And that's how I feel I've been able to make a few inroads, because then the conversation can open up to even broader topics.
Yeah, well, no, it is inroads. You're right, and that's the change that I feel like is different this time around. I'm old enough to have seen moments like this come and go, but there's something different about this. And again, I'm no expert, but I'm not sure if it's a convergence of a global pandemic, along with the civil unrest that we're experiencing right now, and the awful murder of Mr. Floyd. My guess is that has something to do with it, right? Because the pandemic has bubbled up to the surface a lot of things that really have been in place and have existed for a long time with regard to some of these injustices that you're talking about. So it's not surprising to me that we're dealing with these issues, and even more, I think because of the two, we're feeling something a little bit different. It almost feels like a watershed moment.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I remind people that I don't think this is a because there is such a groundswell. There are people in other countries that are supporting the peaceful protests.
It's nice.
Yeah, it is making a difference. And I think you're right. The pandemic and the restrictions and the stresses involved in that have really amplified what have already been existing, which maybe a lot of people hadn't seen hadn't been exposed to, but they are now.
Yeah, well, let's talk about how the most obvious way, how the pandemic has brought out the disparity of those that are sick and dying, right? Black and brown communities, higher percentage of that. So why is that? If we start peeling back the layers, well, there's always been inequity of healthcare, right, in this country. So not new, but the pandemic is showing, is really causing people to look at that issue in a way that I don't know if it can be ignored anymore. Mm-hmm. And it goes on, right?
Right, and then the hourly job holders, right, is also across socioeconomic and racial lines. So those people are exposing themselves, right? At
exactly.
$15 an hour to this virus.
Right. Yeah, and the ones that are likely on the front lines during this pandemic, right? Black and brown people. So there's just a lot to talk about. We need to start digging in. I, for one, am anxious to do that with the arts community. We've started some initiatives we're calling Walk in Their Shoes, which I'm really excited about. So because when I think about the arts community, the artists are the ones that are more likely walking on the streets, holding their neighbors' hands with these protests, right? It's I've got such a love fest with the arts community. Obviously, I think they're the most giving people that there are, and open people that there are. So, it's not surprising to me that on an individual level, these are the folks that you're seeing at the protest lines. These are the people that you're seeing volunteering and donating their time and really involved in these issues. What I was really interested in is seeing how much of that energy, how much of the sense of wanting to change, were they willing to do as a community and to start moving towards some real lasting change.
Well, I think artists also, by nature of them being expressive people to start with, they really are able to encapsulate and capture a moment and everything that's involved around it. Whether the emotions behind it, whether there's strong emotions against or strong for, the struggles, the conflict people are having internally, externally, within their communities, outside their communities, and they they're alchemists, right? They're going to take all this nitty gritty stuff and they're going to manufacture gold out of it, something beautiful that's very expressive. You and I were both at the protest on Wednesday. There was two protests, peaceful protests in Denver. One was on a Wednesday, followed by a Saturday. You and I have both been sort of very conscientious during this pandemic. So that was really a first outing for me with other people, as I know it was for you. If you had to just tell people what you saw that day, someone who wasn't there.
Well, for me, it was profound. It was compelling in the sense that, well, I have a really private reason for it, which I'll share a little bit of, because if I go into it too much, I'm not sure I can keep myself together. But my son, Ryan, who you know, Andrea, was a victim of police brutality in New York. And this happened many, many years ago. But I know what it's like for a mom who has had their child treated that way. And I wasn't there for him. I wasn't there because he did not share with me what had happened to him until he was out of the emergency room, home, and almost fully recovered, is when he decided to share. And he did that only because he didn't want me to worry, as sons would tend to do, being protective of me. So I was not there for him when he went through that horrible experience. And so the march was a little bit of, something that I had to do, a compelling thing that I had to do, and a little bit of catharsis for me to be able to stand up for the injustice in a way that I wasn't able to do for my son. So that was that personal moment. And then the other part of that, I guess, as being a Black person myself, to see Black and white and brown and Asian and just really thousands, what felt like thousands of people of all different persuasions and backgrounds, from the wealthy to the poorest, to come together on this issue, not just in memory of Mr. Floyd, but really on the issues. It was encouraging, and that's not easy for me to say. Like I said, I'm old enough to have seen moments like this come and go, and I walked away from that particular moment feeling much different. Like
it was a watershed. It was a watershed, yeah. Because I remember just the week previously, I mean, we kind of had like a, really like nothing's going to change, like where are things going?
Well, and then some of us, Andrea, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
And I think I even shared this with you. I'm glad you said that we're really good friends, because I've shared some of my deepest, darkest secrets and feelings with you. And one of the things that I will say openly is that I was angry. I started out being as angry as anyone when Mr. Floyd was murdered, for reasons that I mentioned, and others, And so I had to go through that, right? I had to get through the anger to the point where I could actually be at a protest to express myself in a way that is way more productive. And now, of course, I've gotten to a point, luckily, where I'm able to move even further, to take my passion on these issues and how to exact some real change in my small corner of the universe. So, but anger.
Well, I'm really glad you did that, because I think when I mean, the thousands and thousands of people that showed up and peaceful, there was a contingent that went off and closed the highway down, but I can't say I'm fine with the highway closing down. A lot of these protests have happened in urban centers that don't affect a lot of people, just the people who are living in the urban centers or the city centers. To close a highway kind of sends a ripple out to people who might not otherwise experience or witness people protesting.
Yeah.
And the idea of inconvenience is picayune in the face of hundreds of years of systemic racism and injustice. So you are now the alchemist in everything that has gone out, inspired by what was really a lot of young people in our community coming out for that march. And you've put together a program with the Cultural Alliance, as you mentioned earlier, Walk in Their Shoes.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, people can go to the website, you can sign on. I think it's still open for participation, but you're going to start with this conversation. It's going to start, conversations are happening weekly. It's going to culminate in a October event focusing on Black artists. So let us know what that's about.
Yeah, well, first, I just want to mention a little something about the young people that have been involved and sort of kicked off, some momentum here in this area. I am so incredibly inspired by them, as you pointed out, and really proud of them. And I know that I, for one, if there's any young person that views this I am here from. If they need some help, support in any way along their start in civic activism, I would love to support them in any way that I can. But yes, you mentioned getting back around to what the Cultural Alliance has decided to do. Is we're really providing an opportunity for creative leadership who are interested in making real lasting change in their small corner of the universe. We're providing opportunity for that. So we're calling it Walk in Their Shoes. And it was a call to action put out 2 weeks ago. 3 points, really. One is, sign on with a group of allies looking to do real lasting change for racial inequality and social justice. With actionable practices in whatever artistic practice that you do. We're looking to engage a conversation. We're calling it Dialogue and Deliberate, which will be 3 topic-focused conversations around race and social justice. And then thirdly, we're working with any arts organization, institution that would like to dive into diversity, equity, and inclusion policy and practice work. We're putting our support and services and a framework around that to be able to help them to do that. There is still time for people to sign up for a few more days. We're ready to kick this off within the next week or so.
So again, the website is CAWCT, Cultural Alliance of Western Connecticut.org. Just sign up for the newsletter. Lisa puts out a great newsletter. Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining me. And we'll check back in when we're into the program a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.